gravel bike category has been exploding into an ever-increasing variety of subgenres. There's all-road, adventure, racing, utility, monster cross, and that's to name but a few. With all of these subtly different bikes, unpicking which is best for you and your needs can be a bit of a challenge. But on the flip side, it means that there's the potential to find a frame which suits you completely down to the ground. With 2022 models now launching, we've rounded up a somewhat eclectic mix of 7 gravel bikes from right across the spectrum, which have caught our eye and might catch yours too. So without any further ado, let's jump in. Although many people are turning to gravel for its adventurous, non-competitive side, there will always be those fixated on going fast. Optimizations for speed run through the whole bike. Perhaps the most obvious are the nods to aerodynamics with its fully integrated cable routing, drop seat stays, and the chunky tube profiles typically seen on aero road bikes. The carbon wheels even have a little depth at 32mm. The geometry is equally racy. A relatively steep head angle of 72 degrees and nippy 420mm chainstays make the Aspero's wheelbase really quite short for a gravel bike. The result is to quicken the handling and provide a more flickable feel, although with a bit of sacrifice to the stability compared to longer and slacker gravel bikes. Great for racing, a little less so for fully laden adventures. When we had the SRAM Force ETAP build in for review, it tipped the scales at 8.3 kilograms in size 56. Very competitive for gravel and not even bad for a road bike. Coming shod with Panaracer Gravel King SK tyres, the file centre tread and relatively short shoulder knobs were a reasonable match for its speedy intentions. Although with a width of just 37mm, they do stand on the narrow side, even for gravel racing. The gearing choice isn't one you typically see, with a 36-tooth chainring paired to a 10 to 36-tooth cassette. With this, you get the simplicity of a 1x drivetrain while still benefiting from 3 single-tooth jumps for smooth changes in cadence. The trade-off is that with a fairly steep 1x1 ratio bottom gear, hills are still best tackled at pace. Taking a turn in quite the other direction is the Salsa Vaya GRX 600, purpose-built for long-distance treks and rugged reliability. The frame is made from triple-butted CRMO steel with underside of the down tube and triple fork bosses that you'd expect from a bike of this ilk. It's also nice to see mounts for a rack and a set of panniers have been preserved, opening up the potential for longer treks. Mechanically actuated brakes are a feature perhaps more typically associated with lower spec bikes, but when heading into the wilderness, the simplicity and serviceability of this system is a real draw, over and above hydraulics. Now, Shimano's GRX gravel component range doesn't actually include an option for mechanically actuated brakes. Instead, a set of 105 shifters have been pressed into service. Another nod to ease of maintenance is the external cable routing and the full run of outer housing, the result being cables that are both easy to access and protected from the element. With chainstays measuring a whopping 450mm, these are significantly longer than you tend to find on other gravel bikes. These increase the wheelbase, which in turn improves stability. When heavily loaded, particularly if you're running panniers, having the rear axle so far back really makes a difference to just how planted a bike feels. In terms of clearance, the maximum recommended is for 45mm for 700C tyres, but if you pair with a set of fenders or mudguards, that goes down to 38mm. Coming back now to the more playful side of gravel, we have the BMC URS One, which won our 4UP gravel bike group test earlier this year. We felt this bike struck a really great balance between being fun and capable off-road, whilst remaining efficient enough to easily handle long-distance epics. Several cues are taken from BMC's mountain bike range, such as a slacker head angle and stubbier stem. At 70 degrees and 70mm, these numbers are quite far off what you'd get on a modern MTB, but for gravel it's really quite progressive. This, combined with the short 425mm chainstays, adds up to a bike which can be popped around the corners, but still doesn't feel skittish on the descents. Yet, for all that, this isn't a kind of monster cross, essentially MTB with drop bars. It still retains the efficiency you'd expect from a gravel bike. It successfully completed the South Downs Way, a challenging 100-mile gravel trail in the southeast of England. It's not bedecked in mounts like the Salsa Vaya. We wouldn't choose it for bikepacking trips measured in weeks rather than days, but for those shorter local rides which make up the majority of the time spent on our bikes, it's a complete blast and a pleasure to ride. The Rondo Ruut may come in last in our gravel group test, but with the competition so fierce from the Canyon Grizzle and the Tifosi Cavazzo sporting that 1x13 Campagnolo e-car group set, there really is no shame in that. The CF2 2x doesn't really turn heads in terms of the spec you'd get for the price, coming in at £2,799 and sporting 2x10 Shimano GRX and relatively heavy OEM wheels. But swap in some better hoops and you get an extremely capable bike. Chunky 2.1-inch 650V tyres are handled with ease, while the riding position is comfortable and efficient enough for long distance treks. Sure enough, our tech writer Stefan used this bike to complete the South Downs Double, a 200-mile, 320km gravel epic with over 23,000 feet of climbing or 7,000 metres. The Cannondale Topstone Lefty steps things up a notch. With 30mm of both front and rear suspension, it blurs the lines between gravel riding and mountain biking. But, as we found when we had it on test, exactly where this bike slots in the gravel spectrum isn't something you're left pondering for long. Once messing around off-road, it's simply just a bundle of laughs. Before the new Rudy XP-LR fork came out, the Cannondale's Lefty gravel fork was one of the very few gravel suspension forks that were out there. Supple and responsive to those repeated chattery bumps of an ill-kept fire road, it's also not too heavy and doesn't feel like a drag on the ride. Super short change stays of 450mm means that the tyre size is limited to a maximum of 47mm 650B, which is a bit on the narrow side for a bike which is such a bent towards the rough stuff. We'd happily accept another 10mm on the chainstays and slightly less snappy handling if it allowed us to fit some 2.1-inch or 53mm tyres, and stretching out to 425mm would hardly count as long anyway. We were impressed by the Specialized Diverge Comp Carbon when we had it on review, finding it struck a good balance between sprightiness and stability. It doesn't take things to the extreme as the Aspero does for racing or the Vaya and Topstone do for bike packing, but being a little more restrained and a bit more moderate has its own benefits. You're not railroaded into one specific type or style of riding. With the Diverge, you can take it on the trails, spend time on the road, ride it hard, or knock things back and take it easy. For each one of these uses, there are other gravel bikes better suited, but those would end up making larger sacrifices in the other cases. With no fewer than 6 different bottle mounts and specialised integrated SWAT storage system in the downtube, multi-day bikepacking trips are very much in the Diverge's remit. While the 2x Shimano GRX drivetrain of the model we had on test delivers plenty of range for pacing it on the road as well as steep off-road climbs, albeit without the shifting simplicity that comes from a 1x system. At £4,000, the Diverge Comp Carbon does represent a considerable investment, but the range does start at £1,099 with aluminium frame sets. Carbon starts at £2,600. Last on our list is the Vitus Substance CRS2 ETAP AXS. It might be a bit of a mouthful to say, but its combination of great ride quality and extremely good value spec make it a real win in our books. Coming with plump 47mm 650B wheels, we found these to be quite agile while still providing ample cushioning for rougher off-road sections. Bottle bosses on the fork legs, along with ones inside and outside the main triangle, boost the carrying capacity, but what's nice to see is the inclusion of mounts for a rack and set of panniers, adding extra versatility for essentially no downside. But the real party piece of this bike is the inclusion of SRAM's 12-speed electronic group set and the carbon frame, all for the price of £2,499. Now, to put that in perspective, specialised electronic shifting gravel bikes are all over twice that price. If you've got very specific requirements from a gravel frame set, maybe relating to the handling and geometry or tyre clearance, you'll know to look elsewhere. But if you're on a budget and after a well-rounded gravel bike, you can get an incredible amount of bang for your buck. So that's our picks of the best gravel bikes for 2022, eclectic and rugged brands from across the world that all bring something unique to the market, with varied components and uses. If you've got any gravel bikes or builds worth a mention, do let us know down in the comments. Otherwise, please hit the like button and subscribe to see more cycling videos in the future.